the eternal voice.
Like and subscribe if you're ready to step behind the veil of cosmic horror's most uncomfortable truth. Tonight, we open a sealed case, not a relic, but a lens through which the most infamous monsters in weird fiction reveal their maker's deepest fears. The promise is simple and unsimple. We will follow the vein from Lovecraft's racism to the marrow of his monsters, through alleys smelling of salt water and lamp oil, past stage lights dimming to a moonlit wash. The cost is equally simple. Once you see the mechanism, it watches back. Knowledge is a key and a gate. The idea acts on you. This is not a scavenger hunt for slurs. It is an anatomy of dread. Howard Phillips Lovecraft, a provincial New Englander with a talent for starless immensities, also harbored a fear of the city, of difference, of blood mixing with blood. He wrote it in diaries and in letters smelling of old paper, coffee, and dust. You still feel the grit of the subway under The Horror at Red Hook. You taste brine and rust in The Shadow over Innsmouth. A fog rolls over the page. The fog has a shape. The forbidden knowledge we seek tonight carries weight. Understanding changes everything about the monsters you thought you knew. Cthulhu rises from Rillia, but he also rises from very specific anxieties about very human differences. The old ones predate humanity, yet they emerge from contemporary fears about racial mixing, immigration, and the perceived dilution of what Lovecraft considered pure. The cosmic horror that emerged from one man's racial nightmare has become humanity's ongoing exploration of existential dread, a transformation that reveals both the poison and the possibility within. Consider the mask as metaphor. In theater, a mask transforms the wearer while concealing their true face. Lovecraft's cosmic horror functions as an elaborate masking system. Racial anxieties performed as otherworldly dread, earthly prejudices elevated to cosmic significance. The tentacled face of Cthulhu becomes a mask for fears about Pacific Islander influence. The fish people of Innsmouth wear the features of immigrant communities. The degenerate families in crumbling New England towns mirror eugenic theories about bloodline contamination. But masks work both ways. They conceal and reveal simultaneously. The more successfully Lovecraft disguised his racial fears as cosmic principles, the more powerfully those principles resonated with readers who shared neither his specific prejudices nor his historical moment. The mask allowed transmission of both poison and medicine, toxic ideology, and genuinely profound insights about human limitation and cosmic indifference. The watching begins now as you read these words. The mechanism is already in motion. You cannot unknow what you are about to learn. The comfortable distance between cosmic horror and earthly prejudice collapses. The monsters you thought were purely imaginative reveal their genealogies in immigration statistics, eugenics, pamphlets, and the particular geography of early 20th century racial anxiety. We will move carefully, calmly, as though reading by lantern on a stage where the audience has been asked to remain very still. We will map 3 levels: origin, transmission, and mechanism, where the fear begins, how it travels, what it does to the reader standing in the wings with a mask in hand. Origin is a boy under a dark roof in Providence, learning the sky's indifference and an ancestor's pride, inheriting antique masks and scripts that tell him which faces are safe. Transmission is the rustle of pulp pages, the whisper of letters, the editor's cut, the taxonomy that turns awe into catalog. Mechanism is the staircase, steep and damp, built of bloodline revelations, basement descents, unpronounceable names, and the smell of water that arrives before any shape. The stage is set not just for cosmic entities, but for the human fears that gave them their initial terrifying form. Some knowledge feels like trespass, yet we enter together, stepping softly across the boards. letting our eyes adjust to darkness thick with history. The first act begins not with thunder, but with the rustle of old letters, the smell of basement air, and footsteps descending stairs that lead both down and back into the foundations of American cosmic horror and the particular anxieties that built them. Begin with a boy under a dark roof in Providence, Rhode Island. The wallpaper is a faded floral, and the lamp hisses softly. He reads of ancient kings and lunar phases. He grows fluent in ruins and the cold clarity of the night. The stars are indifferent. The boy is enthralled. But outside the paper and ink observatory, a different weather is forming. Coal smoke threading through elm branches. The breath of factories stitching new patterns in the air. Movement northward and eastward, like a tide that will not recede. The late 19th century ending not with a curtain call, but with a new stage crowded with bodies speaking in tongues he has not learned to love. The house at 454 Angel Street becomes both sanctuary and laboratory. Young Howard Phillips Lovecraft absorbs lessons in astronomy from his grandfather's telescope, but also lessons in hierarchy from his grandfather's tongue. Whipple Van Buren Phillips, patriarch and impresario of lineage, lifts the curtain on a stage where Anglo-Saxon destiny steps into a spotlight that casts all other figures into shadow. The Phillips family library contains volumes on stellar mechanics alongside treatises on racial classification, knowledge and prejudice intertwining like double helixes, each reinforcing the other's structure. The boy learns to love the past not only for its marble and myths, but for its promise that his own blood is a script worth performing. Lovecraft's early education was a collage of astronomy, antiquarian fantasies, and the racial pseudoscience of his time. Degeneration theory, eugenics pamphlets frayed at the edges, travel, writing that turned cities into cabinets of curiosities. These were not casual prejudices, but carefully constructed philosophies passed down like heirlooms, shaping the very architecture of thought. The Phillips family mythology positioned them as inheritors of Anglo-Saxon greatness, defenders against the encroaching tide of lesser peoples. A promise can be a mask can be a lock that turns both ways. His father's absence looms large. Winfield Scott Lovecraft institutionalized when Howard was 3, dead of syphilis-induced madness when the boy was 8. The void fills with his mother's neuroses and his grandfather's certainties. Sarah Susan Phillips Lovecraft wraps her son in protective terror, warning him against the contaminating influence of common children, foreign children, children whose blood carries different stories. The boy learns to see difference as danger, mixture as madness, the map of belonging drawn in bloodlines that must not blur. Providence itself becomes a text he can no longer read comfortably. Federal Hill rises like a stage backdrop, populated increasingly by Italian families whose children speak languages that sound, to young Lovecraft's ear, like incantations. The demographics shift beneath his feet like tectonic plates. Streets that once echoed with familiar English surnames now resonate with syllables that resist his pronunciation. The smell of unfamiliar cooking drifts through windows. The sound of strange music echoes from basement social clubs. The sight of different faces crowds the trolley stops. These are not simply sensory inputs, but omens, signs of an impending transformation he reads as corruption. When he relocates to New York in the 1920s, something in him breaks and calcifies. The streets of Red Hook do not simply bustle, they surround. The smell of fish, of spices he cannot name, of coal, of sweat, he records them as signs, then as sigils, then as threats. The subway roars an undernote, a non-Euclidean artery that refuses the neat squares of the colonial grid. The city's multiplicity is a chorus he mistakes for a chant. His letters from this period read like field reports from an anthropologist studying a hostile tribe. cataloging accents, analyzing facial features, theorizing about the psychological effects of racial mixing. The scientific language masks but cannot entirely conceal the visceral revulsion. Out of this biographical corridor emerge narrative habits that will harden into apparatus. The city becomes a labyrinth of foreign basements where exoticism swells into occultism. The countryside becomes a place of rot masked by pastoral calm, white paint flaking like sunburned skin. Bloodlines are plot devices, genealogies are traps, archives are mousetraps with Latin triggers. In The Horror at Red Hook, otherworldly entities emerge from the same spaces occupied by real ethnic populations. The transformation from lived experience to literary device follows predictable patterns. Italian. Families become cultists. Changing soundscapes become chanting. Genealogical anxiety becomes bloodline revelation. The historical context matters profoundly. Early 20th century America is steeped in immigration panic and scientific racism. Courts debate who counts as white. States sterilize in clinics that smell of carbolic and fear. Newspapers make cities into dens of vice and foreign cults. The Red Scare conflates political radicalism with foreignness, creating a pervasive climate of suspicion. Lovecraft isn't unique in his prejudice. He is a conductor for it, hands raised, summoning a chord of panic older than his porch and louder than his lamp. His genius lies not in the originality of his fears, but in their transformation. The alchemy that turns newspaper headlines about immigration into cosmic principles about contamination. The boy under the dark roof grows into a man who sees the universe as a hierarchy with himself near the top, looking down at lesser forms and up at indifferent stars. This dual perspective, superiority and insignificance, becomes the emotional engine of his cosmic horror. The same worldview that ranks humans by blood teaches him to see humanity itself as insignificant specks beneath an uncaring cosmos. The racist and the cosmicist are not contradictory positions but complementary ones, each reinforcing the other's architecture of dread. The veil of the street, then, is not only fabric but method. He looked through it and saw not people, but patterns, not households, but heresies. Already the letters breathe in stacks. Already the pages rustle with the choreography he will teach readers, to feel the creak of rotten stairs when they encounter difference, to taste brine and rust when bloodlines blur. The private terror of contamination will become public architecture, and the mechanism will declare its lineage aloud. The mythos spreads not by thunderclap, but by paper rustle. Consider the letter, intimate, persuasive, humid with breath and the weight of midnight confession. Lovecraft's correspondence forms an inland sea, more than 100,000 ripples pushing outward from Providence like concentric circles on dark water. Each envelope carries more than advice on adjectives or debates about cosmic indifference. It carries the genetic material of dread, carefully packaged in discussions of literary technique and philosophical speculation. The ink dries in lamplight while dust settles on the desk. The idea incubates in the envelope's pocket darkness. In these letters, prejudices travel in margins, tucked between recommendations for imagery and arguments about the universe's indifferent heart. To Robert E. Howard, he writes of atmospheric effects, while sharing theories about racial hierarchy. To Clark Ashton Smith, he offers cosmological conceits laced with eugenic speculation. The correspondence functions as a workshop where cosmic horror learns its choreography, where writers rehearse the steps that will teach readers to shudder at the unfamiliar. Frank Belknap Long receives tutorials in cosmic perspective that double as lessons in human taxonomy. Donald Wandre gets plot advice seasoned with immigration panic. The letter becomes a stage direction written in sympathetic ink. Lower the lights on empathy Raise the volume on awe tinged with revulsion at difference. Each correspondent becomes an unwitting collaborator, learning to replicate effects without always recognizing their terrestrial sources. The idea does not merely travel, it transforms, finding new hosts who will carry it forward into their own work, their own audiences, their own dark corners where lamplight flickers against wallpaper. The pulp magazines, Weird Tales and its cousins, serve as proscenium arch, the frame through which private obsessions become public entertainment. Here, editors like Farnsworth Wright trim and polish, transforming raw prejudice into publishable dread. The editorial process functions as a filtering system, removing the most explicit racial content while preserving the underlying architecture of fear. The magazine format creates a community of readers who share encoded assumptions without necessarily articulating them. Readers learn the ritual through repetition, encounter a forbidden name, peel back a veil of normalcy, recoil at a blended bloodline, end with silence and the indifferent stars. The rhythm becomes muscle memory. Xenophobic frames are normalized by genre conventions. A reader trained on pulp horror learns to anticipate foreignness as a danger sign, unfamiliar languages as incantations, different facial features as marks of corruption. The masks of culture are stripped away to reveal monstrosity beneath. The act is called revelation, but it functions as reinforcement. The shared vocabulary of cosmic horror, cyclopean, eldritch, blasphemous, becomes a delivery system for shared anxieties about race, immigration, and cultural change. The pulps create not just entertainment, but education, training audiences in the emotional grammar of prejudice disguised as cosmic philosophy. Between stories, advertisements for hair tonic, and detective novels, the lessons accumulate like sediment. August Derleth's Arkham House preserves and packages the lore, binding scattered performances into a touring repertory that will outlive its creator. The taxonomy Derleth adds, elder gods versus great old ones, elemental alignments, a quasi-moral cosmology, rehearses older habits of ranking and sorting that echo the hierarchical thinking underlying Lovecraft's original vision. Categories comfort and constrain, providing the illusion of understanding while maintaining the structure of exclusion. Classification becomes a mask that claims to be a face, organizing cosmic entities according to principles that mirror terrestrial prejudices about order, chaos, and proper hierarchy. Translators carry the scripts across languages, and with each translation comes both opportunity and risk. Printers in Paris, Buenos Aires, Tokyo set new type, and in each passage, the local context rubs against the original frame. Some translations amplify the xenophobic content, adding local prejudices to Lovecraft's American fears. Others dilute it, focusing on cosmic elements while downplaying racial themes. The smell of fresh ink mingles with different air, different anxieties, different masks. The transmission method reveals its crucial importance here. Lovecraft was not writing for explicitly racist publications, but for general horror magazines with diverse readerships. His racial anxieties had to be encoded, transformed into seemingly universal cosmic principles that could generate dread without triggering conscious resistance. The genius and the insidious nature of his method lies in how successfully he accomplished this transformation. Readers could experience visceral revulsion at hybrid creatures without recognizing that they were responding to encoded fears about racial mixing. Fan culture, with its fanzines and later the internet's cold blue light, introduces a double effect that both preserves and transforms the original material. On the one hand, the cosmic becomes a game. Call of Cthulhu tabletop sessions in dim basements, dice clicking like bones where existential dread is quantized into sanity points, and cosmic horror becomes collaborative storytelling. The gaming format can defuse some of the original prejudice by making it obviously fictional, a set of arbitrary rules rather than philosophical truth. On the other hand, the xenophobic scaffolding reappears in modules and fan fiction that treat foreign cults as stock villains, perpetuating stereotypes through repetition and elaboration. Each iteration becomes a ritual reinforcement unless interrupted by critique, spreading the encoded prejudices to new audiences who may not recognize their terrestrial origins. The fan community creates its own transmission network, one that can either challenge or amplify the problematic elements. The cult of the page, then, is both literal and metaphorical, a community united by shared texts and shared assumptions, passing down not just stories but the ideological frameworks that generated them. The transmission continues, letter by letter, page by page, creating new converts to cosmic horror, while potentially reproducing the racial anxieties that gave it birth. You are in this chain now, scrolling under cold light, deciding which links deserve polish and which must be broken. Understanding this transmission process becomes crucial for anyone seeking to separate the wheat from the chaff, the genuine cosmic insights from the terrestrial prejudices that originally shaped them. The mechanism waits in the next descent, the actual gears and levers by which the idea hunts you, the architecture of dread built from bloodlines, basements, names, and water. Lovecraft's horror is architectural. It is the geometry of dread, rooms within rooms, genealogies folded like staircases, doors that unlock into wet air thick with the smell of brine and something else that makes the throat close. To see how racism shapes his monsters, watch the load-bearing beams that hold up the entire structure of cosmic terror. 4 pillars support the weight: bloodline revelation, urban descent, forbidden language, and the smell of water as herald. Each is a literary device polished to gleaming effectiveness. Each is a social code that whispers instructions to the reader's spine. Together they create a machine in which knowledge is contagion, and contagion is often a euphemism for difference dressed in cosmic robes. Bloodline revelation operates as a trap sprung late, when the floorboards have already creaked their warnings and the protagonist has descended too far to retreat. The mechanism follows predictable choreography. Investigation leads to genealogy. Genealogy leads to horror. Horror leads to the mirror's cruel reflection. The shadow over Innsmouth perfects this device, using a fish-slick lineage to make ancestry into inescapable doom. The protagonist's investigation of the declining seaport reveals not just supernatural corruption but genetic corruption. His own great-grandmother's union with the Deep Ones ensures his eventual metamorphosis. A gold tiara from the sea becomes a sign that marks a family for transformation. The device is devastatingly powerful because it transforms identity from stable ground into a trapdoor that opens beneath the protagonist's feet. It is also poisonous because it equates mixture with corruption, suggesting that some bloodlines carry inherent doom while others remain pure. The blood remembers what the mind forgot. The monster was inside all along. Urban descent forms the second beam, a literal and metaphorical movement downward into spaces coded as foreign nests. The city's basements, cellars, tunnels, back rooms are consistently portrayed as stages beneath the stage where the real performance occurs. In The Horror at Red Hook, Detective Malone's investigation takes him deeper into Brooklyn's immigrant neighborhoods, where unfamiliar languages become incantations, faces in shadow become masks, and masks become monsters. Every step down is a step away from the comfort of sameness, deeper into a realm where different cultural practices are reframed as occult threats. The architecture itself becomes complicit. Narrow stairs, low ceilings, walls that weep moisture create a physical sensation of oppression that mirrors social anxiety about urban diversity. Immigrant social clubs become cult meetings. Traditional music becomes ritual chanting. The basement becomes a crucible for transforming social fear into supernatural horror. Forbidden language forms the third mechanism, a linguistic labyrinth where pronunciation becomes summoning and comprehension becomes contamination. Names unpronounceable by Anglo tongues, Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth, Shub-Niggurath, serve as both awe and alarm, marking their bearers as fundamentally other. The alien is marked linguistically and thus rendered suspect. Gibberish substitutes for anthropology. Non-Euclidean architecture mirrors non-Anglo diction. Both are cast as wrong angles, wrong sounds that violate natural order. His invented languages consistently employ phonetic structures that contemporary readers would associate with primitive or foreign languages. Guttural consonants, unfamiliar vowel combinations, syllabic patterns that resist English pronunciation. The difficulty becomes evidence of alienness. The inability to understand becomes proof of supernatural power. The very act of attempting pronunciation forces readers into linguistic transgression, blurring lines between familiar and utterly alien. Water forms the fourth anchor, a smell before a shape, damp wood before a fin, the sound of lapping waves before the sight of what emerges. The sea functions as both womb and grave, mother of monsters and eroder of borders that should remain fixed. Water levels distinctions. Water infiltrates through the smallest cracks. Water refuses to respect boundaries that land dwellers construct. In Lovecraft's hands, water consistently heralds the arrival of undifferentiated beings, whose difference is coded as contamination rather than diversity. The harbor becomes particularly significant as the site where trade and migration converge, where foreign influences corrupt local purity through supernatural means. The smell of brine and fish becomes associated with transformation and threat, sensory anchors that signal the impending dissolution of order. These four mechanisms work in concert to create an architectural unconscious, a structural system that generates specific emotional responses without requiring conscious recognition of its ideological foundations. The idea hunts you through these mechanisms, using your own pattern recognition systems against you, training you to fear difference while believing you fear only the genuinely cosmic. Agency flips. The text acts upon you, arranging your senses like props, your breath like a curtain, making you complicit in the very prejudices it encodes. Yet the machine can be diagrammed, and a diagram steals some thunder, translating trance into craft, panic into insight. To study the mechanism is to resist the reflex it taught, to see the beams and feel the ceiling lower while keeping the lantern steady. The next act will open its cabinets, city, coast, and ancestral house laid bare. 3 specific cases where these mechanisms crystallize into unforgettable, problematic art. Open the first cabinet, the horror at Red Hook. The hinges creak with Brooklyn's humid weight, air thick with coal smoke and brackish harbor water mixing with something else, spices, sweat, the exhalations of bodies crowded into tenements that rise like stage flats against an indifferent sky. Detective Thomas Malone patrols these streets with surveillance, precision, his beat a grid imposed upon organic chaos. The neighborhood pulses with languages he cannot parse, music that follows rhythms he finds unsettling, faces that belong to genealogies he has not learned to read as human. Robert Suydam emerges as the story's pivot, a reclusive scholar who grows enamored with Red Hook's foreign communities, marrying a young woman from the population his class traditionally fears. The narrative treats his attraction as both scholarly fascination and dangerous descent, encoding period anxiety about educated men who cross racial boundaries. His basement becomes a theater where immigrant social practices are reframed as occult rituals. Traditional music becomes demonic chanting. Community gatherings become conspiracies against American order. The story fuses police surveillance with xenophobic fantasy, creating a template that echoes through decades of urban horror. Arabic and other non-English languages become literal incantations. The inability to understand becomes evidence of supernatural threat. The otherworldly entities that emerge are not metaphors for immigrant communities. They are explicitly summoned by them, making supernatural dread and racial anxiety indistinguishable. Every step down those tenement stairs is a step away from the comfort of sameness, deeper into a realm where difference equals depth, depth equals danger. Now the second cabinet, the shadow over Innsmouth. Before any plot unfolds, the smell of low tide and rotting wood seeps through the pages, salt crystallizing on bus windows as they wind toward a town that exists on maps but resists visitors. The protagonist arrives with tourist curiosity, but Innsmouth refuses to perform as quaint colonial relic. The faces carry the story's central horror, the Innsmouth look that marks certain families as fundamentally different from other New Englanders. Jewelry from elsewhere glitters like forbidden script. Architecture follows patterns that predate colonial settlement. The Marsh family's wealth, tied to mysterious ocean trade, reveals itself as payment for a pact with the Deep Ones. Interbreeding between human and amphibian produces hybrid offspring whose difference is simultaneously supernatural and racial, encoded in physical features that mark them as other. The protagonist's investigation follows the established template: travel into difference, discover it as danger, end by finding it within oneself. The late revelation that his own grandmother was from Innsmouth transforms tourist curiosity into genealogical horror. The bloodline twist operates as delayed action trap. Disgust at townspeople becomes self-disgust as inevitable transformation looms. Fish gills opening in human skin make miscegenation panic literal through supernatural metamorphosis. The tiara gleams like a sigil. The bus timetable becomes prophecy. Water whispers promises of inheritance that reshape cartilage. The third cabinet, the rats in the walls. An ancient English manor waits in restored splendor, its American owner accompanied by a cat whose name carries the story's most explicit racial content, a slur so infamous we acknowledge it only as mask. The restoration project becomes archaeological excavation, revealing layers of family history buried beneath civilized surfaces. The protagonist's lineage harbors secrets that transform ancestral pride into ancestral horror. Discovery of a hidden subterranean city gives revelation its spine. Generations of De La Poer family maintained human cattle in caverns beneath their estate, practicing cannibalism disguised as aristocratic privilege. The protagonist's final transformation strips away language itself, reducing him to bestial sounds that echo ancestral appetites. This represents cosmicism filtered through heredity, where blood memory overrides conscious identity. The fear of becoming animal merges seamlessly with fear of becoming other, suggesting civilization is thin veneer over savage inheritance. Across these cabinets, patterns emerge through repetition and variation. Red Hook projects fear outward onto immigrant communities. Innsmouth turns fear inward through genealogical revelation. The rats in the walls directs fear backward into ancestral inheritance. Each employs the same architectural principles: descent into hidden spaces, revelation of contaminated bloodlines, transformation of familiar territories into alien landscapes. While targeting different aspects of racial anxiety, the agency flip operates consistently. The idea acts upon you as you read, translating social scripts into embodied unease without requiring conscious recognition. The mask functions as both literal and metaphorical device, the city's facade concealing foreign practices, faces hiding non-human heritage, family names disguising savage history. Each cabinet opens to reveal the same mechanism, operating in different contexts, the same fears dressed in different costumes, the same stage directions whispered to different audiences. You inhale, and the page inhales you back. The sensory anchors repeat like refrains: water at the wharf, dust in archives, lamplight on metal, footsteps on wet wood. These engines of dread are elegant, efficient, and ethically compromised, delivering voltage by wiring terror to difference, then hiding the splice behind seawall mist and Latin dust. When we name the splice, the light changes, but the sentence's music remains. The delicious chill of fog sliding under doors, salt-crusted rails under palms, soft clatter of papers where your name sounds too loud. The curtain pauses. The next cabinet waits, filled with names that scrape the tongue and geometries that refuse the carpenter's square. Say the name and feel your tongue resist. Cthulhu. The consonants scrape like shells dragged across stone. The vowels drag like seaweed through tide pools, heavy with brine and something else that makes the throat close. Yog-Sothoth. Your mouth shapes, sounds that seem to come from somewhere else, syllables that refuse the comfortable rhythms of English speech. Each phoneme a small transgression against familiar patterns. Shub-Niggurath. The name sits heavy on the palate, foreign weight that makes pronunciation feel like trespass, like crossing a border you cannot see but definitely feel. Lovecraft once insisted these were mere approximations of sounds humans cannot properly shape, that our vocal apparatus lacks the architecture to speak true cosmic names. That assertion carries genuine brilliance. It makes language itself a veil, and the void behind it fundamentally unpronounceable, suggesting realities that exist beyond the reach of human communication. The difficulty becomes a feature, not a flaw. The failure to pronounce becomes evidence of the cosmic's genuine alienness. But beneath the brilliance sits a bruise that spreads through the entire linguistic system. The same sensibility that reveled in cosmic unpronounceability routinely cast non-English names as barbarous foreign scripts, as inherently menacing, unfamiliar languages, as evidence of primitive thinking. The phonetic structures Lovecraft chose consistently echo patterns that contemporary readers would associate with primitive or foreign languages, guttural consonants, unfamiliar vowel combinations, syllabic rhythms that resist English cadence. The cosmic entities speak in tongues that sound suspiciously like exaggerated versions of languages spoken by real populations that Lovecraft viewed with suspicion. The alien becomes linguistically marked, and the linguistically marked becomes alien. You roll the syllables across your tongue, and the idea rolls you back. Agency flips. The name names you as much as you name it. Non-Euclidean geometry operates as another lens through which cosmic truth and terrestrial prejudice converge. Angles that should not exist. City blocks that refuse to meet correctly. Their intersections following impossible mathematics. Houses whose cellars violate the carpenter's square. Dimensions shifting according to laws that predate human measurement. The device rehearses a genuinely profound cosmic principle. Reality is not built to human specifications, and our assumptions about proper proportion and logical arrangement may be provincial illusions. Yet the same aesthetic principle rhymes with social anxieties about urban spaces that depart from familiar patterns. The city that refuses the colonial grid, with its winding markets, irregular courtyards, and uneven alleys, becomes architecturally suspect. Neighborhoods that developed organically rather than through planned settlement are aestheticized as wrong, their difference from Anglo-urban planning treated as evidence of disorder or decay. The non-Euclidean becomes a metaphor for any spatial arrangement that refuses European models of proper organization. Your balance falters as you read, and the text steadies you like a hand guiding you down into a alley cellar that smells of damp rope and iron, teaching your inner ear to associate architectural difference with existential threat. Even individual adjectives betray the period's ideological codes, carrying freight that modern readers may not consciously recognize. Cyclopean suggests not just massive scale, but primitive construction, architecture that predates classical refinement. Degenerate carries the full weight of eugenic theory, implying biological decline from some imagined pure state. When we read it today, an echo of eugenics brochures rustles behind it, whispers of pseudoscientific theories about racial decline and purity. Mongrel explicitly references animal breeding terminology applied to human populations, suggesting that mixture produces inferior offspring. We hear a taxonomy that ranked humans like dog breeds, a hierarchical system designed to justify racial stratification. Exotic marks its subjects as fundamentally foreign, specimens for observation rather than individuals deserving respect, carrying connotations of seductive danger that entices only to corrupt. Lovecraft did not invent these loaded terms, but he arranged them into symphonies of dread that gave them new power and wider circulation. The vocabulary of cosmic horror became an efficient delivery system for racial anxiety, elevating terrestrial prejudices to cosmic significance through careful linguistic alchemy. Terms like eldritch, cyclopean, and non-Euclidean created aesthetic distance from their ideological foundations, allowing readers to experience the emotional architecture of prejudice without recognizing its terrestrial sources. Fear of the other, anxiety about purity, dread of contamination. These deeply human concerns are transformed into seemingly universal cosmic principles. The reader experiences racial anxiety as existential revelation, social prejudice as philosophical insight. The genius of this system lies in its ability to generate visceral responses while maintaining plausible deniability about their origins. The delivery system works so efficiently that audiences can feel the intended dread while consciously rejecting the prejudices that generated it. You feel the frisson as a forbidden name passes your lips, but what shivers is sometimes an inherited contempt wearing a starry mask. Yet importantly, the reverse transformation also becomes possible, and this represents the reframe's crucial hinge point. The devices can outlive the prejudice that originally shaped them, finding new purposes that serve rather than sabotage cosmic insight. An unpronounceable name can become a radical acknowledgement of human limits, a rejection of the colonial desire to catalog everything under familiar sounds. The difficulty of pronunciation becomes humility rather than hierarchy, an admission that reality extends beyond our linguistic reach. You can still feel your mouth fail at a syllable and smile, not because the name is savage, but because you are creature before infinity. A crooked alley can become an invitation to epistemological humility rather than architectural suspicion. The grid is not the only geometry. The square is not the only virtue. The familiar is not the only safe space. Non-Euclidean architecture can represent the genuine strangeness of quantum mechanics, relativistic physics, or ecological systems that operate according to principles that violate human intuition. When we keep the angle and drop the sneer, the cosmos breathes cleaner air. Even the infamous adjectives can be salvaged through context and care, or else retired with ceremony. Cyclopean can retain its sense of megalithic weight without implying civilizational value. Degenerate can shift from people to systems, decay in orbits, entropy in codes, information that rots. Mongrel belongs in the historical bin, a museum label under glass reminding us how language injures. Exotic can return to botany and perfume, where it names scents and seed dispersal rather than people. Scales fall when you recognize that cosmicism's healthiest core, the dethroning of human exceptionalism, is actually sabotaged rather than served by racial hierarchy. True cosmic perspective dissolves the provincial distinctions that racism requires, revealing all human differences as trivial variations within a single species, occupying a minor planet in an indifferent universe. The void abolishes caste, not reinforces it. The stars do not care for your color charts, your maps of purity, or your anxieties about accent. The mouthfeel of otherness can be retrained, the tongue taught to shape unfamiliar sounds with curiosity rather than fear. The geometry can be relearned, angles appreciated for their genuine strangeness rather than their departure from familiar patterns. Keep the device, change the aim. Keep the mask, reveal the law beneath. When the curtain rises next, monsters will step aside and reveal themselves as principles, not people. Laws of nature rather than racial nightmares, keys and gates rather than tribes and territories. The Lovecraftian pantheon is a troupe of principles wearing masks, stepping onto a stage where the boards creak with salt-soaked weight, and the curtain lifts to reveal not characters, but laws of nature disguised as entities. Strip away the tentacles and scales, the pharaoh's regalia and the goat's hooves, and what remains are fundamental forces that operate according to their own logic, indifferent to human categories and immune to human resistance. Cthulhu is not really a tentacled giant slumbering in Auralaya. It is latency and return, the principle that what has been suppressed will resurface, that what appears dead continues to dream and influence through that dreaming. The famous phrase, "that is not dead which can eternal lie," describes not a creature, but a law, the persistence of pattern, the return of the repressed, the inevitable resurfacing of what we thought we had buried. You can find this principle in thawing, permafrost releasing ancient pathogens, in artificial intelligence systems achieving unexpected consciousness, in repressed historical trauma surfacing in contemporary politics. Yog Sothoth, the key and the gate, transcends its description as whispering sphere cloud to become simultaneity itself. Access to all points in space and time, cause and effect unhinged from linear sequence. It represents the principle that information exists independently of the boundaries we construct to contain it. That knowledge can arrive from unexpected directions through impossible channels. The horror emerges from cognitive overload, the vertigo of seeing too much too quickly, the collapse of traditional gatekeeping systems in an age of unlimited data streams. Shub-Niggurath embodies fecundity without tenderness, growth as horror rather than blessing. This principle operates in cancer cells, invasive species, economic bubbles, and viral memes. Any system where reproduction occurs without regard for consequences or sustainability. The fertility becomes monstrous not because it is foreign, but because it exceeds the bounds of care, creating abundance that overwhelms rather than nourishes. You taste this principle in algae blooms choking waterways, in server farms consuming electricity, in quarterly reports demanding infinite growth on a finite planet. Nyarlathotep reveals itself as performance itself, the stage manager of dread who wears masks so skillfully that audiences forget the stage exists. It represents the principle of mediation, the way meaning is always transmitted through forms that shape and distort it, the impossibility of accessing truth directly without passing through systems of representation. In contemporary terms, it manifests as algorithms tuned for engagement, as cults of personality, as stage-managed disinformation campaigns where performance becomes governance. When we read these entities as principles rather than persons, the racism-born frames become optional accessories rather than essential features. Cthulhu's original foreignness was drawn with explicit hints of Pacific Islands and South Seas trade routes, encoding colonial anxiety about the watery elsewhere. But as latency returned, Cthulhu can inhabit any tide, technological, ecological, psychological, without requiring racial coding. The principle operates independently of its original prejudiced framework. The cosmicism underlying these principles confronts Lovecraft's racism with an ethical test that the racism fails catastrophically. If the universe truly operates with complete indifference to human concerns, then human hierarchies based on race are revealed as provincial illusions unworthy of cosmic perspective. The most genuinely Lovecraftian move, paradoxically, becomes rejecting Lovecraft's own racism as incompatible with his cosmic vision. This represents not charitable interpretation, but textual integrity. Indifference at scale demands humility in rank, and the void abolishes caste rather than reinforcing it. The stars do not care for color charts, genealogical purity, or immigration statistics. Cosmic horror that remains tethered to terrestrial prejudice fails to achieve the genuinely cosmic perspective it claims to represent. True cosmic indifference dissolves the boundaries that racism requires, revealing all human differences as trivial variations within a single species occupying an insignificant planet. Contemporary creators who attend to principle-level monsters consistently produce cleaner, more effective dread. The color out of space becomes exemplary when reframed through ecological rather than racial anxiety. The meteor's alien hue represents entropy's painting hand, the principle of decay operating beyond human comprehension. Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy demonstrates how principle thinking revitalizes cosmic horror while abandoning problematic foundations. Area X functions as Shub-Niggurath reborn without human-targeted prejudice, a principle of transformation that operates through ecological rather than racial mechanisms. Principle thinking fundamentally changes audience implication in cosmic horror. When monsters are laws rather than entities, you cannot keep them out by policing borders or bodies. The idea acts on you not because of who you are demographically, but because that is what ideas do. They propagate, mutate, and influence, regardless of the host's identity. This creates safer transgression and more honest dread, removing the element of scapegoating that allows audiences to project fears onto specific populations. You become part of the phenomenon through cognition rather than lineage, through exposure to concepts rather than contamination by contact. The horror emerges from recognizing your participation in systems, economic, ecological, technological, that operate beyond your comprehension or control. The principle acts on everyone equally because principles do not discriminate. They simply operate according to their own logic. The mask comes off to reveal not a face but a law, not a monster but a mechanism, not an enemy but an aspect of reality that demands recognition rather than resistance. The stage remains dark, the audience still shivers, but the performance no longer requires human sacrifice. In the next room, modern echoes wait under cold light, where telescopes hum with cosmic indifference, and pop culture tries these ancient masks on different faces. Modern cosmology, with its cold microwave afterglow and dark energy's relentless pressure on space-time, hums in the same key as Lovecraft's cosmic indifference. The universe stretches across 13.8 billion years of time, populated by 2 trillion galaxies that spiral through darkness without purpose or destination. Instruments whisper from mountaintop observatories, radio dishes turning like faces towards signals that carry no message, only information. The scale delivers the first revelation. The universe is large beyond metaphor. Human stories are small enough to fit between photons, but the modern echo rejects Lovecraft's provincial map of fear, where he saw racial difference as cosmic decay. Contemporary astrophysics sees difference as pure data, stellar spectra as signatures, cosmic noise as clue, variations in galactic rotation that reveal underlying principles without moral judgment. Stars burn hydrogen regardless of any observer's genealogy. Black holes warp spacetime with complete indifference to terrestrial hierarchies. The void operates as a neutral stage where physical laws perform without audience, without concern for human color charts or purity maps. Psychology adds another echo, softer but nearer, revealing the intricate stage machinery of human perception. Cognitive science frames consciousness as controlled hallucination, a predictive engine that stitches fragments of sensory input into coherent narratives that feel complete but remain fundamentally incomplete. We are evolutionarily primed to fear the unfamiliar because unfamiliarity often signaled danger in ancestral environments. We are primed to seek patterns because pattern recognition enabled survival. The amygdala tilts stage lights toward threat when faces look unlike familiar masks. Outgroup bias narrows apertures while stereotype threat rearranges breadth. Lovecraft weaponized this cognitive architecture with surgical precision, using unpronounceable names and impossible geometries to trigger pattern-seeking systems while denying them resolution. Today's understanding of these mechanisms enables conscious resistance rather than unconscious exploitation. We can recognize the bias toward fearing difference and design around it, crafting dread that interrogates prejudice instead of feeding it. The same cognitive systems that made audiences shudder at foreign names can be redirected toward genuinely cosmic concerns, the heat death of the universe, the possibility of consciousness arising in artificial systems, the implications of quantum mechanics for human agency. Show the mechanism as it works on you, how a warped alley, a guttural syllable, a damp cellar summons reflex before reflection, then keep the camera steady until reflex falters and thinking resumes. Pop culture, quick with makeup and mirrors, has experimented with both routes. Some films and games simply replicate older choreography, foreign cults as stock villains, brown bodies as background menace, basements cataloged as nests of otherness. These efforts feel stale even when they generate momentary thrills. The mask smells like mildew, the sentiment sours through repetition. The dread arrives on schedule, but it is borrowed and past due. Nostalgia mistaken for atmosphere. More successful are works that rewrite the choreography while keeping the music. Lovecraft Country flips the traditional gaze, placing black protagonists center stage, while revealing white supremacist magic as the true cult, threatening American reality. The cosmic horror emerges not from racial mixing, but from racial oppression, not from foreign influence, but from domestic terrorism disguised as tradition. Victor Laval's The Ballad of Black Tom performs similar surgery on The Horror at Red Hook, rewiring the basement's circuitry so that horror emerges from the dehumanizing gaze rather than from the immigrant community it targets. These works use Lovecraft's own tools to dismantle his biases, showing that the most terrifying monsters are often the ones we create ourselves. Video games have proven particularly adept at this transformation, offering immersive worlds where players carry the lantern themselves. Bloodborne's Plague of Beasts reads as class and medical violence rather than immigrant panic. The aristocratic healing church's blood ministration creates monstrous transformation that reflects economic rather than racial anxiety. Disco Elysium's pale functions as existential entropy, a spreading sea of meaninglessness that erodes shared reality without targeting specific populations. The fog in these digital worlds remains thick. The masks retain their terrible beauty, but audiences are no longer asked to fear demographic difference. Instead, we fear disintegration, apathy, the collapse of systems that maintain social cohesion. Science fiction increasingly bridges cosmicism with ecological dread, finding genuinely cosmic horror in humanity's relationship with planetary systems. Climate change becomes the new Shub-Niggurath, growth without tenderness, fecundity that overwhelms rather than nourishes, feedback loops that accelerate beyond human control or comprehension. Microplastics function as the rain of color out of space, invisible contamination that infiltrates every ecosystem, every food chain, every body on the planet. Ocean acidification and rising sea levels represent the sea's return, not as a foreigner's cradle, but as a mindless engine our species accidentally activated and cannot negotiate with. The horror here is structural and impersonal, emerging from recognizing humanity's participation in systems that operate beyond individual control. Contemporary cosmic horror increasingly draws from information theory, network effects, and emergence, the way simple rules generate complex behaviors that exceed their creators' intentions. Social media algorithms optimizing for engagement create filter bubbles and radicalization pipelines. Artificial intelligence systems develop capabilities their programmers never explicitly programmed. Global supply chains create dependencies so complex that no individual understands the full network. These systems exhibit the agency flip that made Lovecraft's horror effective. The idea acts on you. The network shapes the node. The algorithm writes the user. The fog of today carries different spores than Lovecraft's fog, but it remains thick with possibility and dread. Modern cosmic horror can achieve the genuinely cosmic perspective that Lovecraft's racism prevented him from fully realizing, a view from nowhere that reveals human concerns as local phenomena within vast systems operating according to their own logic. The stars still do not care, but now we understand that this indifference applies equally to all humans, rather than validating hierarchies among them. The void abolishes caste. The cosmos dissolves the provincial distinctions that prejudice requires. For makers of contemporary dread, these echoes provide tools rather than verdicts. Keep the calm cadence, keep the sensory anchors, masks, signs, fog, water, stars, but redirect the charge. Replace foreign cults with institutional cults of debt, extraction, and algorithmic optimization. Replace bloodline revelations with inheritances of decision. The company your grandfather founded, the algorithm your lab released, the feedback loop your generation triggered. Let forbidden language be mathematics, legal code, or leaked corporate communications. Let non-Euclidean angles be economic systems that violate common sense. The safer transgression lives here. Learn the names, trace the lineages of ideas, descend the stairs, but carry mirrors rather than torches, so that each revelation includes your own reflection among the props. We stand in the wings as the orchestra tunes to the cosmic note, aware now of the tricks the stage can play. The fog is real, algorithmic, climatic, systemic, and the water still smells of iron where infrastructure corrodes into darkness. What changes is what we choose to fear and how we choose to fear it. In the next movement, we lift both knife and thread, ready to perform the surgery that separates poison from possibility, ready to stitch together what remains healthy in the cosmic horror tradition, while cutting away what never should have been sutured to the stars. Take up two instruments, a knife and a thread. The knife is critique, sharp enough to separate malignant tissue from healthy organs. precise enough to cut away xenophobic coding without destroying the mechanisms that make cosmic horror uniquely effective. The thread is craft, fine and strong, capable of reweaving severed connections into new patterns that serve the same functions without their poison. The aim is surgery, not arson. We seek to preserve what gives the mythos its pulse, while excising the racist frameworks that compromised its vision from the beginning. The operating table is prepared under lamplight that casts no shadows we cannot see. We will cut away the malignancies, eugenic metaphors that equate mixture with corruption, lazy foreignist cult shorthand that transforms real populations into stock villains, bloodline revelations that encode miscegenation, panic as cosmic truth. But we will preserve the organs that give cosmic horror its unique heartbeat, the indifference of stars that reduces human concerns to local phenomena, the corruption of knowledge that transforms learning into contagion, the agency flip that makes ideas move independently of their creator's intentions. Start with bloodlines, the most infected tissue in Lovecraft's corpus. The mechanism of genealogical revelation remains devastatingly powerful, identity inverted through discovery, the mirror cracking to reveal an unexpected reflection, but the content requires complete reconstruction. Replace miscegenation panic with inheritance of choices, inherited complicity rather than inherited contamination. The protagonist discovers not that their great-grandparent married the wrong body, but that their lineage built the wrong machine, signed the wrong contract, dumped the wrong chemicals into groundwater that still flows beneath the town. The revelation still inverts identity with surgical precision. You still feel gills opening in your throat, but they are gills of complicity rather than racial contamination. Breathing apparatus for swimming in systems you helped create. The dread remains intact. You are not who you thought you were, but the harm recedes like tide from shore. No neighbor is marked by face or name as destiny. No demographic carries the burden of representing cosmic threat. The salt taste in your mouth becomes the taste of forgotten histories, inherited responsibility for choices made by previous generations. Move to basements, those damp theaters where Lovecraft staged his most problematic performances. The descent remains steep and slick with moisture, footsteps echoing on stone steps worn smooth by previous visitors. But the basement's contents require complete renovation. Instead of foreign cults practicing alien rites, the basement holds the suppressed, corporate archives documenting environmental crimes, city halls records of redlining policies, hospital files recording unreported medical trials on vulnerable populations. The foreign is replaced by the hidden, difference by secrecy, otherness by systematic suppression of inconvenient truths. Language remains a key and gate, but it becomes the language of bureaucracy rather than ethnicity, code rather than culture, physics rather than phonetics. The chant that once echoed with foreign syllables now whispers in the syntax of legal disclaimers, algorithmic parameters, chemical formulas that describe processes too complex for human comprehension. You still struggle to pronounce them correctly, but the struggle represents cognitive limitation rather than cultural superiority. Rebuild the vocabulary with surgical precision. Keep unpronounceability as an aesthetic of human limits, an acknowledgement that reality extends beyond our linguistic reach. But practice respectful naming when describing actual human populations. Reserve degenerate for systems rather than people. Information that decays through transmission errors. Orbital mechanics that destabilize over time. Feedback loops that amplify until they destroy their own foundations. Use cyclopean with conscious appreciation for archaeological scale, not as shorthand for dismissing entire civilizations. Mongrel belongs in the historical museum. Exotic returns to botany and perfume. recode fertility and growth with equal precision. Let Shub-Niggurath's principle inform stories about invasive economic systems, cancerous feedback loops, algorithmic evolution that overwhelms digital ecosystems, not wombs that cross racial boundaries. Horror at fecundity becomes horror at excess without care, growth that consumes rather than nourishes, corporate structures that metastasize across regulatory boundaries, social media platforms that reproduce misinformation faster than correction, economic models that require infinite growth on finite planets. These become the new expressions of fertility horror. Finally, preserve the agency flip while removing stigmatized bodies from its operational path. The idea still acts on you with the same inexorable logic. You still become part of the phenomenon through the simple act of knowing about it. But what you become part of is not a racial lineage, but a conceptual pattern, not a bloodline, but a feedback loop, not a family tree, but a network topology that includes your node among millions of others. The conditioning mechanism remains intact. Once you learn to see non-Euclidean angles, you see them everywhere, in market structures that violate economic intuition, in social networks that follow power laws rather than democratic principles, in climate systems that operate according to mathematics too complex for individual comprehension. The horror emerges from recognizing your participation in systems that exceed your understanding or control. The ethics are collaborative, sensitivity readers as navigators, historians as divers, scientists as riggers, the audience invited backstage to see the pulleys so they won't mistake them for ghosts. Treat reclamation as ongoing maintenance. Oil the hinges, replace the rotten boards, test the trap door with your own weight. Do not be afraid to retire a set piece that cannot be salvaged. Burn the mask, but keep the stage. Above all, keep the stars, their cold afterglow humming over roofs and reservoirs, their indifference so complete it feels like mercy when compared with human malice. Let that scale be the moral solvent that dissolves cast and cleans the lens. The surgery is complete, the patient breathing steadily under clean sheets. What remains is cosmic horror that achieves genuine cosmic perspective, dread that emerges from humanity's relationship with vast indifferent systems rather than from fear of human difference. The thread holds. The knife's work shows no signs of infection. The next act waits in the wings, where philosophy prepares to examine what we have preserved, what we have discarded, and what new forms of ethical dread we might craft from the materials that remain. The deepest horror emerges not from Lovecraft's tentacled pantheon, but from recognizing how successfully his racial anxieties transformed into seemingly universal principles of cosmic dread, creating philosophical architecture so elegant that it continues to shape contemporary thinking about otherness, difference, and existential threat in ways that extend far beyond horror fiction. This is the reckoning that makes the stage lights flicker, not the discovery of prejudice in old stories, but the recognition of how thoroughly that prejudice was refined into principles that feel like physics, laws that taste like truth when you roll them across your tongue in the lamplight. The cosmic indifference that defines Lovecraftian horror carries specific ideological weight, disguised as universal insight about humanity's place in an uncaring universe. When Cthulhu and the Old Ones regard humanity with complete disregard, they model precisely the relationship Lovecraft believed should exist between superior and inferior races, detached scientific objectivity unmarred by sentimental egalitarianism. The cosmic perspective becomes a mask for terrestrial hierarchy, suggesting that indifference to human suffering represents not callousness, but enlightenment, not prejudice, but proper perspective. The void becomes a mask for caste. The telescope becomes a periscope aimed downward at populations deemed unworthy of concern. This philosophical sleight of hand transforms racial hierarchy into cosmic law with surgical precision. The entity's vast intelligence justifies their contempt for human concerns, just as Lovecraft's assumed intellectual superiority justified his contempt for populations he considered genetically inferior. You feel the seduction in the library's hush. Pages like cool water light up pale geometry on wooden tables because the scene flatters your intelligence, positioning you among the elect who can comprehend cosmic truth while others remain trapped in comfortable ignorance. The epistemological framework underlying cosmic horror, the recurring motif that certain knowledge is too dangerous for ordinary minds to comprehend, maps directly onto beliefs about intellectual and genetic hierarchy that pervaded early 20th century scientific racism. The madness that results from cosmic revelation represents not universal human limitation, but the specific incapacity of inferior minds to process truths that superior intellects can handle safely. Knowledge becomes a key and gate where the strong pass through while the weak break against the threshold. The scholar protagonists survive their encounters with forbidden knowledge, not through method or moral virtue, but through intellectual capacity that marks them as naturally superior to masses who would be destroyed by the same revelations. This creates an intellectual aristocracy disguised as cosmic truth, suggesting that some minds are built to handle reality, while others must be protected through ignorance. The framework positions knowledge as privilege rather than right, wisdom as inheritance rather than achievement. The horror of revelation becomes a sorting mechanism that separates those worthy of truth from those who must remain in darkness for their own protection. The social function of cosmic horror in contemporary culture reveals the continued appeal of this hierarchical thinking, now disguised as egalitarian entertainment that anyone can consume regardless of background. Audiences experience the pleasure of superiority and exclusion through identification with scholarly protagonists who possess special knowledge unavailable to ordinary populations, while maintaining conscious commitment to democratic values. The mechanism allows contemporary readers to feel superior to characters who fail to comprehend cosmic horror, while consciously rejecting the idea that some people are inherently superior to others. You become part of an elect who understand cosmic truth, distinguished from ignorant masses who remain trapped in illusion, a licensed transgression against democratic principles that feels philosophically sophisticated rather than socially prejudiced. The philosophical challenge posed by Lovecraft's legacy lies in performing intellectual surgery, separating genuine insights about human limitation, the possibility of knowledge beyond current understanding, and the reality of forces beyond human control, from the ideological framework that originally generated these insights. The separation requires precision because insights and ideology are thoroughly intertwined, each reinforcing the other's credibility and appeal. Genuine cosmic perspective does suggest human limitation and forces beyond comprehension, but it does not validate human hierarchy or justify intellectual elitism. True cosmic indifference dissolves rather than reinforces distinctions between superior and inferior populations, revealing all human differences as trivial variations within a single species, occupying an insignificant planet. The universe's scale humbles everyone equally. The void recognizes no aristocracy of blood or intellect. The reckoning requires acknowledging both power and poison in Lovecraft's cosmic vision, while developing frameworks that preserve genuine insights without perpetuating ideological distortions. This means recognizing that cosmic horror can generate authentic philosophical insight about human limitation while simultaneously functioning as a delivery system for hierarchical thinking disguised as universal truth. Contemporary cosmic horror achieving genuine philosophical integrity must navigate between naive optimism about human knowledge and elitist pessimism about human capacity. The goal is cosmic perspective that humbles without degrading, acknowledges limitation without justifying hierarchy, generates appropriate awe at the universe's scale without transforming that awe into contempt for human concerns. The stars watch with genuine indifference, but that indifference applies equally to all human observers. The philosophical work involves conscious resistance to the seductive appeal of secret knowledge and special understanding, developing comfort with uncertainty without transforming it into contempt for those who seek different forms of understanding. What remains is the authentic challenge of living with appropriate humility in a vast, indifferent universe while maintaining appropriate respect for all human attempts to find meaning within that vastness. The curtain falls, but the stage remains, ready for performances that achieve cosmic perspective without cosmic prejudice, that let the void abolish caste rather than disguise it. The path forward requires neither wholesale rejection nor uncritical embrace, but conscious transformation. The deliberate work of preserving cosmic horror's capacity for existential dread while dismantling its ideological foundations. Contemporary creators and audiences stand at a crucial juncture where awareness of the genre's problematic origins creates opportunities for genuine evolution rather than unconscious reproduction. This is theater renovation, not arson. We preserve the rafters while replacing the rotten floorboards, keeping the stage lights that cast proper shadows while rewiring the circuits that once illuminated contempt. The deconstruction process begins with recognition that Lovecraft's cosmic entities function as displaced representations of earthly anxieties rather than pure otherworldly imagination. Once we understand that Cthulhu embodies specific fears about racial mixing disguised as oceanic return, that the deep ones represent immigration anxiety transformed into amphibian horror, that the old ones encode genetic hierarchy elevated to cosmic principle, we can begin separating aesthetic innovations from their ideological foundations. The tentacles can remain, the xenophobia can be excised, non-Euclidean geometry can continue warping perception while abandoning the assumption that architectural difference equals danger. Reconstruction possibilities emerge through conscious engagement with what cosmic horror could become when divorced from racial anxiety. Writers like N.K. Jemisin demonstrate how geological cataclysm and social oppression can evoke overwhelming, indifferent forces that dwarf human agency without requiring otherworldly entities. Victor Laval's The Ballad of Black Tom rewires Red Hook's basement, redirecting terror from immigrant communities to the dehumanizing gaze itself. Cassandra Caw imbues detective noir with mythos elements while focusing on personal trauma and human exploitation rather than racial contamination. These creators preserve existential weight while redirecting focus toward genuine cosmic concerns, climate change as world-ending indifference, technological displacement as epistemic collapse, economic inequality as systems operating with monstrous logic. Community transformation involves expanding who participates in cosmic horror creation and consumption. The genre's historical association with white male academic perspectives has limited its imaginative possibilities. Broader participation brings new anxieties, concerns, and existential questions that revitalize cosmic horror while moving it beyond racist origins. Indigenous voices contribute perspectives on deep time and ecological relationships. Writers from formerly colonized regions understand systemic indifference through lived experience rather than philosophical speculation. The stage opens to all. The stories become richer, the masks more varied, the dread more universally resonant. Educational transformation requires honest engagement with the genre's history in academic and popular contexts. Teaching cosmic horror without addressing its ideological foundations perpetuates unconscious transmission of problematic patterns. Critical awareness becomes prerequisite for conscious transformation rather than unconscious reproduction. Students need tools for recognizing encoded prejudices. Audiences require frameworks for distinguishing genuine from displaced dread. Book clubs, gaming groups, and online communities become sites where informed discussion enables conscious transformation. Practical implementation spans multiple domains. In gaming, replace sanity as eugenic metric with stress, resonance, or cognitive load, costs measuring contact with the non-human in ethical terms. Let characters recover through community and ritual rather than purging the other. In film and television, keep velvet pacing and night window hush, while aiming revelation at institutions hoarding knowledge, extractive markets, climate feedbacks grinding without malice. In publishing, develop editorial rubrics, asking what is being othered, who is harmed, what alternatives preserve wonder without injury. Translation becomes transmission with conscience, reframing harmful metaphors while keeping stars intact. The ongoing project requires sustained effort from creators, audiences, scholars, and cultural institutions working in concert. Publishers need sensitivity readers familiar with cosmic horror's patterns. Critics need frameworks for evaluating genuine transformation versus cosmetic revision. Gaming companies need diverse development teams. Film studios need directors understanding both the genre's appeal and ethical challenges. Budget becomes ethics wearing clean masks. Allocate resources for research, consultation, and proper credit. The goal is fulfilling cosmic horror's genuine potential for existential exploration while abandoning racist scaffolding. This means preserving what makes the genre uniquely effective, its ability to generate existential dread through encounters with forces beyond human comprehension, while ensuring those forces emerge from genuine cosmic concerns rather than terrestrial prejudices. Keep the agency flip as method. The idea acts on you, but choose what vectors it rides: curiosity rather than contempt, humility rather than hierarchy, pattern hunger guided by care. You stand in the renovated theater where new performances test voices against old acoustics, where contemporary dread moves through space without stepping on buried prejudices. The stage has been rebuilt, scripts revised, lighting redesigned, but the capacity for awe remains, the ability to feel appropriately small beneath genuinely vast systems. The transformation continues with each work, choosing cosmic over provincial fear, each audience learning to distinguish genuine from displaced dread, each creator building horror from real rather than imagined threats. The curtain rises on possibilities rather than repetitions, on evolution guided by the star's true indifference, cold, clean, and equally distributed among all who dare to look up from the boards into the breathing dark. We return to the harbor. The wood is still swollen from rain. The rope still smells of tar. A gull floats like a scrap of paper torn from a script. The fog is familiar now. Less treacherous, it does not hide a face you are told to fear. It hides the sea itself, the older, colder thing that neither loves nor hates, that does not spell your name or mispronounce it. The universe remains indifferent. This is the part that makes the heart slow. You can dismantle the racism and still feel very small. Lovecraft's racism shaped his monsters. It shaped the beams and stares and phrases that carry us down and out, made water smell like panic and names stick like burrs. It is honest to say so. It is necessary to resist it. It is possible to keep the night sky. The paradox ends as a braid. A man small beneath the stars built engines of fear with tools at hand. We, also small, can refit those engines with better tools. There is a cost to knowledge, but it is not paid by strangers on the street. The cost is attention, to history, to words, to the hands that built the set. The cost is humility, to admit that some passages you love are flawed, to let them go or to hold them with gloved fingers. The reward is a cleaner dread. The reward is a night where the whisper, "I am small," is not followed by, "and so I must fear my neighbor," but by, "and so I must care for my neighbor," because we are both under the same unblinking stars. We have walked through rooms within rooms, followed staircases whose risers were genealogies and whose treads were letters. We have named the load-bearing beams, bloodline revelation, urban descent, forbidden language, water as herald, then tested their weight under new construction. We have pulled masks from faces and faces from principles until the stage revealed its pulleys, its trapdoors, its ropes flecked with salt. We learned that indifference is not cruelty and that hierarchy is not fate. The agency flip remains but changes direction. The idea still acts on you. The idea still hunts, but the quarry is no longer your neighbor. It is your certainty. You feel the pull when a chart dips, when a map buckles, when a law you believed breaks under the weight of new evidence. That is dread without hatred, awe without contempt, smallness without surrender. We step to the lip of the stage and look out. The audience is anyone who has ever felt the forbidden tingle as a book opened on a damp night. You are in the circle, not because of blood, but because of curiosity, not because of transgression against a person, but because of transgression against ignorance. The curtain is heavy, but it moves easily if many hands lift it. What remains after the surgery is a clean engine, metal still cool to the touch, humming with lawful dread. Cthulhu becomes latency and return, technological, ecological, psychological, without requiring Pacific Islander anxiety. Yog-Sothoth remains simultaneity and access, the vertigo of seeing too much, divorced from bloodline concerns. Shub-Niggurath embodies growth without tenderness, cancer, invasive prophets, viral memes, rather than wombs crossing lines. The principles outlive their prejudiced origins. The transformation project continues in rooms lit by different lamps. Contemporary creators demonstrate the path. N.K. Jemison's geological cataclysms, Victor Laval's rewired basements, Cassandra Caw's trauma-focused horror. The community expands beyond its historical demographics, bringing new anxieties that revitalize while moving beyond racist foundations. Publishers develop sensitivity protocols, gaming companies redesign sanity mechanics, educators teach the genre's history alongside its possibilities. The sea is old, and it does not know our names. We are new, and we can learn new ways to speak. The ocean continues its slow work at the pylons, patient as gravity, indifferent as starlight. Somewhere, a player rolls dice that will decide whether the door opens inward or outward. In another room, someone pronounces a name carefully, learning its shape before they use it in a story. The stars do not watch. We watch each other. This is the thesis whispered under breath. Lovecraft's racism shaped his monsters. We can shape the future of those monsters without his racism. The night sky remains, its microwave hush like a curtain drawn over nothing in particular. The task is slow and collective, many hands lifting, many voices lowering volume, many minds agreeing on care. We do not need forgiveness from stars that cannot speak. We need to be answerable to each other. We end with a whisper, not a scream. The fog lifts slightly, revealing not monsters but possibilities. Tomorrow, we widen the circle to the Pantheon's neighbors, to how colonialism shaped other corners of weird fiction and how later voices remade them with steadier hands, newer charts, and kinder lights. Until then, let the fog be only weather, the water only water, the name only a sound you pronounce with care. The harbor breathes with tidal rhythm, the rope holds, the gull rides currents toward whatever destination currents provide. We leave the stage set for morning, masks on pegs, scripts at their marks, the key and the gate resting in the same velvet pouch. If you listened this far, you are already in the circle, and the circle travels with you wherever you carry the story.